we're going right in the direction where I always end up, because I think that NHRA drag racing in general, is such a great sport. The entertainment value is extremely high, and I've never had the experience of bringing a first-timer to the racetrack and having them walk away saying, I didn't really like it. Everyone does like it. I would like your thoughts on where drag racing can go next. What do you think about the future of NHRA drag racing, where it's going, what it needs to do to continue to stay extremely popular and relevant in the coming American society?
Well, that's the $1,000 million question that everybody's asking right now. With the economy and the situation that it is, obviously money is tight. And right now the sport is dominated by money. And while folks may lament that, if you have enough history going back into it, it's pretty much been, as I had said earlier in this interview, how fast do you want to go? How much money do you want to spend? That has been the truism of the sport since its inception. I think it has a great future. It has to kind of find its own level maybe in terms of promotion, and I don't have the answer to that. I think that it's now faced with the challenge of so many other activities available to its core marketplace, which has always been the 18 to 34 age group. And I think it has so many competitive things that it has to go up against in terms of sports, in terms of other activities. The digital world has revolutionized everybody's life. Here I am in California talking to you on a telephone, doing an interview on a program completely across the country. This thing would have taken weeks to put together 40 or 50 years ago. So the changes in technology, not only in the sport of racing, but also in our lives in general, has made it a different world. And I think it takes a rather dedicated effort to get the interest level back on track again. What the absolute solution is, I don't think anybody has the answer. But I think everybody is trying to come up with something that will be compatible not only with the economy of today, but also the realization that we are exceeding any kind of thought of what the car performance would be. And that, of course, is something that has to be considered. There's a lot of really premium racetracks around the country that cannot be expanded. They are limited. They are landlocked, if you want a phrase that is totally descriptive of it. And that presents a problem because, as has been proven over the years, you don't slow the racers down for long. I don't care what you do in the way of rules changes. Now, you could be terribly draconian and put in rules and regulations that would totally revolutionize what they're doing performance-wise, but you have to temper that with, is it a marketable commodity if you do? And that's the conundrum that they're stuck in my mind right now.
I agree completely, and you think about Pro Stock as an example. There's been a lot of discussion on this show about Pro Stock, and has it stagnated perhaps from the golden days of these great rivalries that we had, whether it be Glidden against Rayer and Morrison and Shepard, or the Dodge Boys versus Warren Johnson. Right now, what's going on there, and some have suggested changing the formula to a turbocharged formula. Others have suggested maybe going even smaller with some of these, what I would call manufacturer-relevant formulas.
That's an interesting, that whole Pro Stock world's a very interesting thing. I have a particularly strong affinity for them. I had the opportunity to go to Roy Hill School, and I actually got a Pro Stock license and drove one of his school cars in a couple of 3 races. In fact, it was Bruce Allen was my first side-by-side race, at that event. And I went up to Bruce, and this is a little sidebar from where we are going to go with this, but I went up to Bruce before it was at Houston Raceway Park, and I said, Bruce, you know, I'm brand new to this. I said, if you want me to leave first and you wait, just tell me, or if you want to go and make the run and turn off the track, I'll leave then. And he looked at me and he said, I've watched you drive. You're better than some of them that are out there doing it full time. He says, let's go at it. So I did, and of course, I was in a car that was a mule car for Roy's school, so it was not a real competitive Pro Stock car.
But you're a real driver. You're blaming the equipment already.
That's all right. Of course I am. You don't think it was anything a result of me. But as I say, I have a rather strong affinity for Pro Stock. It's the most fun I've had in a race car other than in my own Fiat and winning the March meet back in '98. But that's a whole other story. The Pro Stock thing is interesting. It has continued with innovation. We talk about innovation not being there. Trust me, you look at those cars, and everybody says, oh, this is terrible, they're doing this and they're doing that. Read your rule book. It is allowable. If you want to keep things or change things, then change the rule book. Don't blame the competitor or the car builder or anybody for pushing it to the limits. That's the whole premise of fighting a rule book, is push it to the absolute limit. If you exceed it and get caught, then you pay the penalty, you change it or pay the fine, whatever it is, and bring it back within specs. But the rules are there and are applicable to all. If there are some people who are better at interpreting those rules and using them to produce a more competitive car, how do you penalize them? Why should they be penalized? So you're really stuck between a rock and a hard place. Yes, I personally feel that the modern-day cars that are coming out, the Challengers, the Camaros, and the Mustangs, with the super combinations, not only supercharged in some cases, but the old performance car of years gone by, I personally feel that it would be advantageous to put them in a single class or a category of their own, much like they did when the factory started back in the 60s, coming out with the factory hot rods, if you will. For a number of years, they ran in their own competitive category against each other. I think that would be very beneficial, but that's not my decision to make. So there you're stuck with that. There's a lot of interest in those cars today, and justifiably so. But they have not, in my mind, been able to showcase them in a proper context that would bring back some of that old factory rivalry days. I was invited to and had the good fortune to do the voice track for the audio book, We Were the Ram Chargers. And while it sounds like a commercial plug, I'm going to point out that it's a great book and a great audio book because it gives you an insight into what went on through that whole era of factory hot rods, how it came about, where it went, and it refers to all categories, obviously with an emphasis on the Ram Chargers Mopar efforts. But it's intriguing to read what all transpired in those days. And as I say, the Pro Stock thing is just like Top Fuel. The innovations you may not see, but if you look at the times, they keep getting quicker and faster. And the only way you're doing that is further development of something you can't see.
Dave, what do you think about the modern media covering drag racing? Sites
I think they're lacking, but that's been... don't pin it on the modern media. You ought to have been in the business in 1969 to 71 or any time in that era and trying to get media to pay attention to you. Basically, it was an outlaw sport that they did not hold in high regard. You have to understand there are very few people in the media business that are active participants or have ever been active participants in the sport of drag racing. I bet if you went to the sports departments and the sports editors of every major publication in the United States, you'd be lucky to find two that ever were competitive or ever participated for a continued period of time in drag racing. I'll bet all of them at one time or another played some sticker ball sport. So in some regards, that hasn't changed a bit. The same thing is applicable today. There are more motorsports writers in the country today than there were back in those eras, more auto racing editors and that kind of thing. But if you take a look at it, it's still, in their eyes, a secondary sport. NASCAR being the primary one stateside, Formula One internationally, but it's a continuing battle all the time in trying to get extended media coverage. That's why NHRA ended up bankrolling their own television series, because that's the only way they saw that it was feasible to get continuing coverage. And that is still in effect today.
And we have these sites like Competition Plus and Drag Illustrated, even my show, WFO Radio, even though we're listened to around the world by drag racing fans, where we have just kind of struck out on our own because of that fact.
Yeah, and that's part of the technology change that I was referring to earlier, is the fact that all of these various means of communication have cropped up over the last 15 or 20 years as the Internet has grown in stature and ability to access to the general public. That's how it's become possible. But we need to talk in terms of mass media, not so much Internet. Internet serves a very, very worthwhile role in this. But let's talk about the New York Times. Let's talk about the Los Angeles Times. I've had the good fortune knowing personally the last two motorsports editors of the LA Times. And they are dictated to by their superiors as to what they're going to cover and why. And there we go back to that same old problem. The sports editor, the guy that runs the department and makes the assignment decisions, probably is not a great fan of drag racing. So are you going to send the guy to the drag race, or are you going to send the guy to a NASCAR race?
Yes.
I hate to say it, but drag racing is going to end up second choice in every case.
Yeah, that is terrible. And the question is, how do you reverse that trend, and if it is even possible to reverse it? And we've got people like Alexis DeJoria coming in next year, and hopefully
right.
Courtney Force, that may be able to change some of that trend line, but it's going to be tough.
It's going to be tough, and let's put it, at my advanced age, I'm not going to be able to capitalize on the results of it. I'm not going to see the results, because this is a long-term thing that has got to have a lot of dedication to it. How you go about trying to market the sport, how you go about trying to reach the individuals that are responsible for it. There are so many facets to that problem that it takes a good period of time to realize any benefits.
Dave, it's been great catching up with you. Thank you for taking the time with us today here on WFO Radio. Your career, it's appreciated greatly by those of us who watched on Sundays and went to the track and were informed. And you educated thousands and thousands of young drag racing fans over the years, and I learned much of what I know about the sport just through listening to you, and not just about drag racing, but broadcasting in general. So I want to thank you personally for that, and thank you for taking the time to be with us here on the show.
Joe, it is my distinct pleasure, and I wish you well. And anytime you'd like to relive this, we'll be happy to do it. And all you got to do is call. And to one and all, a very happy holiday season. Merry Christmas, and I hope everybody has a healthy and happy, prosperous New Year.
Now, I have one request, though, from Bobby Bennett, the editor of Competition Plus.
I know Bobby quite well.
Bobby would like me to ask you to recite the classic intro live now in Dave 2012.
Live NHRA Championship Drag Racing on TNN.
Dave, thank you so much. It's been great catching up with you. We'll definitely have you back. And once again, I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time with us here today.
You bet, Joe. Thank you.
Dave Mcclelland. That's going to do it for another Competition Plus Audio Magazine feature. I'm Joe Castello of WFO Radio for CompetitionPlus.com.